Vicky Quinn Fraser is a writing coach who helps misfit business owners find their voice on the page. She is the author of How the Hell Do I Write a Book? Banish the Blank Page of Doom. That's What She Said, Tales of Business Success from Women Just Like You, and Don't Eat the Frog. She is an expert on writing with ADHD, which is something I am eager to compare notes on. Welcome to Notes from a Ghost, a podcast about stories and the people who tell them. My name is Charlie, and I'm a ghostwriter. I love a good story. I hope you enjoy this one. Vicky, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Charlie. This is really cool.
So I read something on your site that was like truly heartbreaking and sad, even though you wrote it in kind of a comedic way, and that was that you got hit with a slipper in school while daydreaming.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank God that kind of thing doesn't happen much anymore.
I hope it doesn't. Yeah. I don't know if that's showing how very aged I am. I didn't think I was that old, but yeah, it was primary school. And it was Mrs. Stubbs, who was terrifying. And I remember her as being like this very tall, thin woman. And she always wore kind of brown tweed. I'm sure she wore other stuff, but that's what sticks in my head. And she also had like really tall hair. And I think she had glasses with obviously like a chain coming around. And yeah, I just remember getting sent to the headmistress's office for daydreaming in class. I was probably drawing on my desk as well, because I tended to do that if I didn't have an exercise book to draw on. And yeah, just getting the slipper. And like, she didn't beat me with the slipper. It was a very gentle tap, but I do remember getting the slipper. You would get the slipper if you misbehaved.
Man, well, it sounds like, if you're anything like me, that there was that experience of like really loving books and loving reading, finding that school kind of wasn't really built for you, and having those two things kind of be at odds with each other. How did you navigate that?
By daydreaming and getting the slipper mostly, because it's funny you should say that, because I think I can't remember exactly what I'd done, like exactly the situation, but it was probably to do with and this isn't, I don't know why I'm prefacing this. I'm not going to preface it. I could read really well before I went to school. I was not reading kind of The Cat Sat on the Mat when I got to primary school. I was reading The Famous Five and The Magic Faraway Tree and Enid Blyton. And so when I found myself in English lessons and we were reading The Cat on the Mat, I was bored. I was really bored because I was reading proper books at home. And so obviously I was going to daydream because this was, I'd already done this. The stories weren't interesting. And yeah, so I found it really difficult. There were other classes I really struggled with. Like I was not ever that interested or great at maths, for example. But yeah, English and reading, I just really struggled to concentrate on anything that bored me, anything which I think is common to most kids, to be honest, but it's exacerbated in kids with ADHD because we find it very hard to sit still. And being a girl, I obviously internalized it all because girls are told to be nice and quiet and good, and boys get away a little bit more with the kind of boisterous behavior that goes with it. So I really struggled with that, and I think the way I navigated it was to just disappear into my own head. So it looked like inattention, it looked like I was not interested in class, it looked like I wasn't paying attention, which, to be fair, I wasn't a lot of the time, but that's because class was boring. So it was difficult.
Yeah, I mean, boring is the word that I would use when I think of describing school. The way I put it to some people is, speaking as someone who has been held underwater, I find boredom, not by another person, but by like the sea. I find boredom is worse than not being able to breathe.
But it kind of feels suffocating.
Yeah. There's a chest feeling that I associate with it, and it was pretty much continuous in school. I have this theory where like my reading interests are really weird and lopsided because I was kind of a delayed reader because of the hyperactivity you describe. And I love and always loved and still love Matilda, and I never got into Harry Potter. And I think it's because Harry Potter is a book about how school is magic, and Matilda is about how school is hell on earth, but books are magic, and the right teacher can change your life.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there's a lot more to Harry Potter than that, but I found that I didn't want to read about school.
Yeah, and I would always, because I used to read some of the like Mallory Towers and St. Clair books, but they were about like the naughty girls in school and how they got into trouble at school, and so I kind of really identified with that because they seemed to always be trying to escape from that kind of that kind of life. But yeah, I can totally see how you would be more drawn to the Matilda books because school was an oppressive. I found it to be an oppressive place, and it's funny you should say about boredom as well because it's I always find that I am never bored if left to my own devices. Like there's always something fascinating to do, but boredom is always imposed on me by the outside world. And at school, that was by adults trying to make me do stuff that just I wasn't interested in, which I just not interested, which sometimes was just because I'm not interested, and sometimes was a failure of teaching, I guess. Or like in adult life, it's like, oh, you need to do your taxes, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that because it's really boring. And so it's just very upsetting that I have to do boring adult things now I'm an adult. I don't like it.
Right. I mean, and so do you credit some of that with how you found yourself on the actual like making end of the book world, where you're in the mix, you've written books, you're helping people write books. Do you think that maybe if you didn't have that kind of fraught relationship with attention in school, that maybe you'd be doing something academic? And
yeah, maybe I've done a lot of jobs over my life. Like I left school quite early, and then I went back again to university a bit later to do what I wanted to do. But yeah, I don't know. I think I would have always struggled in really structured environments, other people's structured environments. I've always struggled with that. I struggled to focus on details that I don't find interesting. It's not that I have a lot of attention to detail with like my client work and stuff like that. But I think part of the reason that I love coaching people so much to write is because I will get bored of my own projects quite quickly. So the ones that I finish are really the ones that I care a lot about. But with client work, the reason that I love working with people to help them write, I think, is because that never becomes boring to me because I'm playing with other people's brains. And yes. That makes me sound like a mad scientist, but it's like I get to like dig around in there and I get to figure out what are they struggling with? Why are they struggling with that? That's really interesting. Let's solve that problem. And it's like a real problem solving thing for other people, which always seems more important and urgent to me than my own stuff, which is not necessarily a healthy outlook, but that's kind of the way it is. So it's yeah, so I hadn't really thought about it like that, but yeah, maybe that is a reason why I've kind of gone into coaching other people to write and write books.
Well, and there's something about project-based work too, where like I find, a project is usually done before it's boring. And then you get to start a new one, and then even if it's very similar to the one you just finished, you'll have that novelty. What when it comes to, and I have like a bunch of coaching questions, but just from the point of view of writing I can remember even like when I started really focusing on writing, I can remember I had people in my family who were kind of like, well, like that's not going to work because you can't sit still and it's sort of the ultimate desk job. And I think they were like half right about that. And what would be your advice to somebody who is writing or starting a book who has that extra ADHD twist to their work life?
Extra ADHD sparkle, yeah.
What's that like cliche that everyone get like calling it a superpower or whatever?
Really, I'm going to go off on a tangent now in a typical ADHD fashion. It's like, why are we so binary? Why are people so binary? It's like either it's a superpower or it's a curse. It's like it is both in different circumstances. Like it's neither one or the other. And there's a podcast that I really enjoy that I'm not going to name, by a guy who's quite well known, and he refers to it exclusively as a superpower. And I do find that a little bit frustrating because it's like, yes, I get what you're trying to do. And I understand that you're trying to kind of, put the best light on it and make the best of it. And I'm all for that. But we also have to recognize that sometimes it's really disabling. And, to be in denial of that is not helpful. Anyway, that's not what you asked. You asked
no, but I want to stick with that for a second and just totally indulge the tangent because I think it's such a good point. There was something that I encountered that to me is a much more nuanced look. You probably read ADHD 2.0, the Hallowell, his latest book.
I have not.
Cool. Especially like if you read Driven to Distraction back in the day, it's like he's updated with kind of the last 20 years of research and whatnot. But he has like a table of kind of different traits and how any one of them, there's kind of a good and a bad side to it. And because I think on the one hand, the superpower crowd is right in that ADHD has a lot of positive, quote unquote, symptoms. And so it can be easy to think, well, actually, it's my superpower. But a lot of those, yeah, there's a flip side to it. I mean, the one that kind of has recently wreaked some havoc in my life, kind of brutal honesty based on a hyper focus on kind of little expressions. So like you're going to be the person where everybody thinks someone's great, and then you're kind of like, oh, I think that they're actually kind of a scumbag. And you might voice that, and you might hurt people's feelings. And everyone I know can probably point to a time where I was a little too honest about something, but just because like I just, and so like that might sound like a positive thing, but it can cause a lot of drama.
But it's like that kind of thing, and it's like that lack of filter. And I think partly that is really difficult for, and we can learn to maybe do that a bit less. But I also think partly it's a structural thing as well, because a lot of the stuff that we find really difficult wouldn't be a problem if the world wasn't set up the way it is, and the world's not set up for us. And so it's like maybe a little bit more radical honesty wouldn't be such a bad thing in the world, maybe, because I find it really, I don't know about you, but, and I haven't had a diagnosis for this, but I suspect I'm autistic as well. And so one of the things I really, really struggle with is reading social situations. And I feel like everybody else was given a handbook at birth about how to be a good human, and like I just didn't get it. And so like I struggle to join in conversations, I struggle to play games, I struggle to know when to wait in a queue and when not. And so I will either barge in or I will be completely left out on the outside and wonder what's wrong with me. And so there's all this other stuff as well. And it's like, I just think that sometimes things would be a bit easier if it was permissible to just like not say unkind stuff deliberately, but because that's not cool, and there's not really an excuse for that. But just like maybe a little bit more radical honesty would be a helpful thing sometimes.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways like that I've found to navigate adult life is to find situations where that's actually sort of called for, or in my work ghostwriting, I channel it into like asking questions that sort of encourage someone to be brutally honest with themselves and that sort of thing. And I find like it isn't so much like a not noticing social cues, it's just not being stimulated by them. I find like small talk to be really tedious, and I find it's how like when you're a kid and you're told you shouldn't say like I hate people who, you should say I hate it when. But I like hate people who kind of think they're doing the right thing by keeping a conversation surface level. And some of that, like, that's not them, that's me. That's like knowing that doesn't work for I don't know, but that's like, so to bring it back to the writing, I finding something to do where you are essentially like professionally interested is, and it sounds like you found that with the with coaching.
Yeah.
And also like, what's a coach? I mean, oftentimes I would imagine your job consists of pointing out what should be obvious but maybe isn't.
Yeah, that is a lot of it, and like you said, a lot of it is asking questions and allowing people to come to their own, to come to their own conclusions. Because quite often people already have what they need inside them. It's just that we don't know how to think. Most people, we don't, we're not taught to think in schools. We're taught almost the opposite, or at least when I was at school. And it doesn't seem like my husband is an engineer, and the company that he used to work for, he used to have to try and recruit engineers to come and do so. And he really struggled because he was like, they have qualifications and they can't do anything. Like there's no practical problem solving there. And so it was really difficult to recruit for the kind of traits that they needed. And so I think that's kind of one of the things that I love about what I do, is that I'm really poking people to think all the time and getting below that surface level. And I think that really is an ADHD superpower, I think, is that, and an autism superpower is that like real boredom with surface level stuff. It's like, I don't want to talk about the weather with you. And that's one of the things that I love about the people that I hang out with, because we tend to flock together. It's like you'll meet someone and 5 minutes later you'll be like, right, let's talk about how you want to be buried. And do you know what I mean? And it's just like, we're not going to talk about the weather, and we're not going to talk about what do you do for a living. It's like, let's get right in there. What are your values when it comes to death and burial? And it's just, I love that, because you learn so much about someone so quickly. There's none of that kind of social awkwardness that I have with the normals, and where it's like, I don't know how to do this. I literally don't know how to have this conversation. And so I will ask something really inappropriate, or I'll say something inappropriate in like air quotes. But yeah, I would much rather kind of dig into the weird conversations about have you heard about the mating habits of octopuses? That's really cool. And, the latest thing I'm interested in. I just think that, that is what I love about what I do, because I don't work with any particular niche of writer or person who wants to write a book. And so I get to learn so much about so many people, and I just get to be really, really nosy. And I just think, and people pay me for this. And I'm like, surely this isn't legal.
No, I know what you mean. It's so funny where you feel kind of like a pirate but those questions, I mean, that's huge, especially because I think sometimes, if someone has done a lot of podcasts where they've told their story a lot, or they've been in media, oftentimes they'll have like rehearsed talking points about themselves. And I think those weird questions, like being slightly invasive, knowing when to, and you never know. I mean, a lot of people are like, because I feel like I'm painting with a really broad brush of like everyone who small talks is boring. But sometimes what's going on behind that is somebody thinks that's what they're supposed to do, but they sort of can't wait to tell you about some weird story, and unlocking that and knowing how to poke in the right ways.
It's very cool. I've got a really cool example of that from somebody that I did a session with. I'm sure he won't mind me talking about it. I won't name him, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind because he's already written about it. But I was really surprised when he came to me, actually. This was not about book coaching. It was more about writing coaching. And I was offering a kind of service where I help people to come up with content ideas that they might not otherwise have come up with on their own. And he got talking about his past, and he's a Christian, but he used to be like really fundamentalist, like a proper fundy, and then had some really objectionable views, and that's his words, not mine. And he was talking about how he woke up one day and just was like, this is not what God wants for me. And he totally changed, and he's like one of the coolest humans that I know now. He is so cool. He's really kind, all of the opposite stuff. And I was like, that's awesome. I was like, do you know how rare it is for people to change who they are, like fundamentally their identity? And he was just like, well, yeah. And I was like, do you talk about this in your writing and stuff? And he's like, oh God, no, that's really scary. What would people think of me? And I was like, people will think you're freaking awesome, because it's so rare. And like just that little perspective shift. And he actually does talk about it now, which I just think is amazing, because like that's like I helped to do that, and that's such an exciting thing for me, because it's just like just having that outside perspective to be able to go, well, have you thought about this, and shifting the perspective from, oh, I can't do that, to maybe I can, actually, maybe this is a really, really cool thing. And that is what I love about what I do, and about coaching, and about basically being nosy and kind of getting to the heart of the stuff that we're not supposed to talk about. It's like, actually, I get that small talk has, social lubrication, blah, whatever. I don't really understand why, but it is. But like this kind of getting into stuff that really matters, and talking about things respectfully. Another reason, I'm getting excited now. That's another reason why I think it's like so important to not do the small talk thing if you can avoid it, because we don't talk about the things that matter, and then we end up screaming at each other about them. I just think if we could talk about the things that matter calmly and try and understand where somebody else is coming from, even if you really hate what they're saying and disagree with it, it's like, let's come at it from a curiosity position instead. And I just think so many bridges can be built that way, and it's a shame that we have to be polite about it instead.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think that those, even the idea of like no-go topics, there's something kind of insidious about that, because you're basically saying, let's prioritize the mildest person in the room, and let's just not even talk about the possibility of building those bridges, rather than maybe actually doing so. I think too, there's an art, and this has come up on this podcast before, but to this kind of non-reactive way of listening, because people can see if you're judgmental. Like, you noticed I made a face when you told that joke, but I hope it wasn't like I just thought what you said was like hilarious, and like I'm picturing that moment. I'm there with you. But I think I don't know that you would have kept telling that story if I sort of looked at you like, where are you going with this? And I think that's a really important skill, because when someone gets to that very vulnerable place and they're about to tell you that thing, they're going to stop if they can see that you're judging, or you hope that you still like them when they're done talking. And
yeah, it's a rare and valuable skill, and it's one that I don't always have. Like, I have it, I can do it when I'm talking to coaching clients, when somebody is paying me. That sounds terrible, but you know what I mean? It's like when I've got a coaching client and I've put myself into that space, I can do it. I find it very difficult to do it when I'm talking socially or with family who might have very different views from me, which I know, like, other emotions get involved. I find is very, very difficult for me. So it's interesting, isn't it, how context changes who you are and how you behave.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And I think sometimes that to my detriment, it'll be something I'll like leave that curiosity and open-mindedness at work, and then I'll work from a very prejudiced point of view and with family sometimes. So back to kind of writing with ADHD. If I were just to had like 2 seconds to just like, hey, I'm about to write a book and I have ADHD and it doesn't seem like I even can. What would be kind of some concrete things I could do to actually get it done, to maybe work in a way that's going to play to my strengths instead of just making me feel like Bart Simpson, like hitting himself in the head?
That's a really good question. I have a client actually who is one of my favorite clients, and she cannot sit still and write. She does literally everything on her phone, and she'd been really struggling. I have other people who say that as well. Like, I'm like, then don't write. Don't write with a pen and paper if that's not your thing. Don't write with a keyboard and a laptop if that's not your thing. Get your phone with your notes app, with your voice recorder, and go for a walk. Spill your brains into it voice-wise. There are so many transcription services now that are free, or you can pay someone to do it. Literally, here the other day, like, the words aren't the important part. And I know that sounds really weird coming from a writer and a writing coach. It's like, the words and the story are the vehicle for the idea, and it's the idea that's the valuable thing. And if you can't get the idea out because the words are getting in the way, then nothing is ever going to happen. So, like, I'm all about how are we going to get that idea out, and if that is by speaking it or by interpretive dance on video or by painting it in a picture, I don't care. I have conversations with my cats all the time, and they're very, very helpful. And so it's like whatever gets that idea out of your head and helps you to figure out what you think. Like, because the other thing is, like, I think a big part of what people struggle with when it comes to writing a book or anything is like, they have, like, I'm going to write about this. Okay, cool. What do you think about that? And they don't know because they haven't really given it that much deep thought. And they haven't sat with it. They haven't kind of interrogated it. They haven't talked it through with anyone. And even if you haven't got anyone to talk it through with, this is what writing is, right? Writing is thinking. And so at some point, you're going to have to put some kind of marks on paper or digital paper. But like, before that, talk it through with yourself on a phone or a voice app or a recorder or whatever you want, or like I say, with your cat or somebody else. Like, I've had conversations with my husband. He's great for this kind of thing. And we'll record them. And he will ask me the odd question, but really it's just me bouncing ideas off a kind of reflective surface. And that's the valuable thing. So I would say to anybody who, particularly ADHD people who are struggling to kind of get started, it's like, whatever you're trying to do, stop trying to do it, because it's going to be counterproductive at some point. Go do something else and figure out what it is that will allow you to get the idea out of your head, because it's the idea that is the valuable thing, not the words you use that will come later. It's like, get that idea out, however is good for you.
And I think there are a couple really basic things that I wish, and that part of why I started this podcast, there's certain things about the process that I want to demystify. And a couple of things that come to mind, sort of what you're saying about figuring out what you have to say before you commit to writing a book. I think that's like the number one problem of especially nonfiction. Fiction, I don't know, I can't speak to that. But I think that if people saw what the professional outlining process looks like in serious nonfiction, they'd be astonished at how in-depth and involved. Like, when we get off this call, I'm going to be finishing the polish on like a 30-page outline that's due, and it's like 10% of the book basically are written in extreme detail. The other thing is that you don't have to, like, nobody writes all day long. Like, that's not a thing. And if you were to write a page every day, you would write a book every year. If you were, in an hour, if you had an hour a day or 45 minutes, you could probably produce a rough draft in less than a year.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. I think I have talked to so many people who are like it reminds me of that. There's this thing. It's like notorious now in the world of like digital nomads, but Charlie Sheen's character in Wall Street is saying that if he can just work for his like evil father firm for like a few more years, he can have the money to ride a motorcycle across China. And he can finally leave Wall Street. Well, that's like a $600 dream. Like there are people who have done that working far, like not on Wall Street. And so I think, and I've talked to people who are like, I want to write something when I have the time to write all day. And it's like,
and you're never going to write anything.
You're never going to write anything. And the people who wrote all the books that made you fall in love with writing in the first place, they weren't writing all day.
No. It's like, was it Elmore Leonard who wrote his first novel on the train on his commute on the way to work every day, and like half an hour a day? And you were saying, if you've got 45 minutes, I would say if you've got 10 minutes, that's enough to get started. It's like, especially ADHD people with very all or nothing, we're back to that binary again. It's like, I haven't got half an hour to write today, therefore there's no point. It's like, you could write for 5 minutes. That's enough.
I think Elmore Leonard had written like 5 novels before he quit, and his day job was he was a copywriter for, I want to say, General Motors or maybe Chevrolet, like in somewhere. And I mean, and so he was already, I mean, the most recent example of that I can think of is it Michael Hunk, the guy who wrote working in Geneva for one of these international organizations, and he would just show up an hour early to work at a very, very demanding job and write this Western novel.
And there's a couple of hard truths to be had here as well. It's like, and I'm gonna preface this with another thing that I think really feeds into this idea that you need a lot of time, that comes from the well-known bros of marketing.
Oh boy.
who are writing their books. I'm not gonna name any of them. We all know who they are. But they're like, I did nothing else for 2 months but write my book. It's like, yeah, because your wife's at home taking care of your kids and cooking your food. Like, that's why. And they don't acknowledge that privilege. And so people are like, oh, well, I should be able to do this. No, hardly anybody can do that. So that's the first thing to say, is like, a lot of people have a lot of privilege when it comes to that kind of style of writing that the rest of us just don't have. And the other thing, what was I going to say? The other thing I was going to say was, let's go. There you go. ADHD.
Oh man, those tech bro authors will throw you like that. It's
yeah, they do. They always cite something. Oh, it might have been the old ADHD thing again. Oh, it'll come back. It's fine. But yeah, it was just like that kind of level of privilege that we don't all have, and that we can fit our writing in elsewhere. It's okay to do that. It doesn't make you any less of a proper writer, whatever that is. There is no right or wrong way to write. There is just your way, as long as it gets done. And there's processes and things that you can follow. But again, like, it's literally why I wrote the book called Don't Eat the Frog, because not everything works for everybody. So we can find a way that works for us.
Yes, no, and I want to come back to Don't Eat the Frog, because like the title alone, and I remember I had encountered that book before. Just real quick book recommendation on that point of asking these like refreshing, disorienting questions. Werner Herzog's book, Guide for the Perplexed.
Yes,
it's like a book length interview basically, but he has a few examples in there of his kind of knowing when to sort of put someone on their back feet in an interview. And there was one, he was talking to like an astronaut, and he's like, I can't explain it, but having grown up on a farm, I just know if you grew up on a farm when I meet you. And he asked the guy, like I think it was like, when was the last time you like milked a cow or something like that, or have you ever milked a cow? And the guy was kind of like, how did you know that? And sure enough, grown up on a farm.
It's so funny.
But there's a real art to knowing when to ask him. The other one too that's huge, and a lot of nonfiction people talk about this. Louis Theroux is a master of this. Creating, if you get quiet, the other person will fill that silence.
Just sit and wait, because people don't like an uncomfortable silence.
And that one, like, if you have a high tolerance for awkwardness, it's amazing what people will tell you, because they'll just go.
Yeah, that's something that I have, because I used to have a podcast as well. It's kind of on hiatus at the moment, but I used to do that on my podcast, and I didn't realize back then that it was an actual technique. It's just that I am quite awkward myself, and so I was just like, I'm just going to sit here and be awkward, and it's kind of fine. I'm going to wait for them to answer that question. But yeah, that the power of the silence. And I know it's a sales technique as well. Like, people resist the urge to keep talking and just let the other person make the decision. So
no, it's Yeah, it's a powerful, and then obviously, and this came up on a recent episode with someone in the intelligence community asking why everything, like a toddler. But the other thing, though, the other side of this, when we're looking at like, and before we got on this call, we were talking about the kind of continuum of like everybody loses their car keys, but for someone with ADHD, it might be that they lose them to a degree where it's a problem. And like the fact is, writing is really hard for everyone. Starting a book is really hard for everyone. Finishing a book is really hard for everyone. What's maybe some advice for the person who has no problem sitting still and that they are not going to be having that extra hurdle, but they are still going to have to deal with how hard it is to write a book?
Yeah. So, and this has just taken us back to the thing that I'd forgotten that I was going to say, which was
Please.
the harsh truth thing, which is like, not everybody has a book in them. Like, that's one of those pieces of like those sayings that is just, no, not everybody has a book in them. Not everybody has enough to say about something that it can fill a whole book. And that's not to say that everybody's story isn't interesting, but like, not everything needs to be a book. So there's that. The other thing that I would say is, if you're really having trouble sitting down to write the thing that you think you want to write, do you really want to write it? And I think that's a really important question to ask. And it's okay if the answer is no. There's no judgment there. But it's like, writing a book is really hard. It's a really hard thing to do. I am not one of those people who is going to sit here and tell you that it's easy and you can do it in a weekend just to sell, just to sell some more stuff. Because it's not. It's a really hard thing to do. If it wasn't hard, everybody would have done it. And hardly anybody does it. And so my question would be, like, do you really want to do this? Like, is this really the topic you want to write about? Are you sure? And kind of really take them through. I do like a workshop thing with people that's all the stuff that people should do before they start writing a book but don't. And that's one of the things that we get them to think about is is this something that you really want to write about for the next 6 months? Because that's probably how long you're going to be immersed in it for. And it's okay if the answer is no, but like if somebody has somebody just told you that you should write a book about this, cool. Do you want to?
Well, and like to your point about why the tech bro writing his book in 2 months can be so instantly off-putting. As someone where, I give a lot of latitude for people not acknowledging privilege, because I think there are certain situations where it's, well, of course, like, and the fact is the world needs Olympic athletes and it needs founders and it needs writers and there are going to be, that's kind of how progress works. But where I think people get really rightfully kind of irate or upset or just annoyed is when you have the combination of like unacknowledged privilege and like insincerity. Because if somebody was like, yeah, my family made tremendous sacrifices so I could write an amazing book and devote everything I have to it, that might not be fair, but it's something that people beyond just that person, it's not just their little ego project. But I think to basically be like the person you're describing of like, I want to write a book. I don't even know why. And because people are waiting on me hand and foot anyway, I have the luxury of doing so. I think that's where people get really pissed off. And you see that even with, celebrity poetry anthologies and things like that, where it's just like,
That's a whole other can of worms that I get really frustrated about. No, it's a good TED Talk. And I totally get it. Because it's like, I have no problem with people using their privilege. Like, use your privilege however you want. It's the world is the world. But like you say, the problem that I have is when people are like, I did this and now you can too. And this is how I did it and now you can too. And if it doesn't work for you, then you're broken. And that's the problem that I have, because there's a whole bunch of stuff there that is under the surface. Like, even leaving aside the actual truth about how they wrote the book, which is that somebody else took care of their whole life while they did it. You've also got the whole, well, that process is not necessarily going to work for you. And this is one of the things that I see quite often. And I understand there's like, people will write their first book and they'll get really excited. Oh, I've written this book and now I'm going to do a course on how to write a book. And I'm like, no, don't do that, because what you're going to do is show people how you wrote the book. And that's not the same thing at all. And again, a lot of people who follow them, because they tend to have a lot of following, they're going to be like, oh, this is amazing. They've written this book. I love this book. I want to write a book like that. I'm going to do it. And then it doesn't work for them. And then they're like, I'm terrible. I'm a terrible person. I'm broken. And it's like, no, and I don't even blame the person who wrote the book and did the course. Because if you do, like, if I do something and I love it, I get excited. I'm like, oh, I want everybody else to do it as well. And I get that. But like, just give it a second thought before you dive in and think about, this is why book coaches exist and writing coaches exist, because it's like we haven't just done it, we've helped a lot of other people do it as well, and so we know a lot of stuff about a lot of different situations. And yeah, it's that kind of sometimes I think it's just like puppy over excitement, and sometimes I think it really is like insidious, how much money can I make out of this? And that's the problematic side. Yeah, just to have people just keep your eyes open and think about who's saying something, why are they saying it, how are they saying it, is this really true? And again, it's kind of like critical thinking skills again, right? It's like, where is all of this coming from, and does it ring true? Is it something that I am going to be able to do or should even do?
It's so true. And because the weird flip side of that I would say is that some of what you and I have described so far of how writing works, you get your idea out, get it solid, like, put in the time and create a structure that works for you. If you do those things, like, you will write a book. Like, writing a book is hard, but people who kind of follow steps that aren't gimmicky and aren't a life hack and don't involve upending your life or requiring someone to, that they're the secret is that there kind of isn't one in that sense. And that
I know. It's really funny, isn't it? Because everyone's like, oh, but that's really boring. And it's like, yeah, it is.
I said that to someone, the whole like 1 page a day thing. And they were like, no. And I said, yes, there are 365 days in a year. The book you want to write is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 to 350 pages. If you commit 1 page a day to your book, like, just because of how addition works, like, I fully, like, because this person was arguing with me, and they were like, I just don't agree with that. And I was like,
they have a reason?
No, and I mean, that was the thing. They were like, just that for me personally, like, I'm like, well, not, okay, if you can't write a page every day, that's a different thing. Or but what I'm saying is, like, if you could write a page every day, it was, I don't know. We never got to the bottom of that, but they just felt that there must, and they wanted to know what the secret was. And they refused to believe that that's it.
Yeah. And that's so interesting, because I have so many things I want to say now, because it's like, I think the romantic poets have a lot to answer for, talking about muses and things like that. It's not magic. It's not information from the gods. It's like, that's not like inspiration. Oh my God, the inspiration method. It's like, that's not how inspiration works. Inspiration works by going out and doing things and noticing things and making notes and blah, 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 observing. And motivation, I'll do it when I'm motivated. Then you'll never do it. It's like, you start the thing and then you get motivated to continue it. That's like, it's physics, and it's also psychology, and it's just how we work. And yeah, this idea that it has to be magic, it's like, oh, but it can't be that prosaic. It's like, well, I'm sorry, but it is. And I think, again, that goes back to, this is one of my harsh truths that I was going to say, it's like, everybody wants to have written a book. Nobody wants to sit down and do the damn work. And it's true. And like, if you're sitting here listening to this podcast and being like, I would like to throat punch you, Vicky, that's fair. I understand that. I'm really annoying, but I'm also right. Like, it's true. It's like, if you really, really want to write the thing that you want to write, you will find a way to make it happen, because we do find a way to make happen the things that it's like, when I'm not going to sit here and say we've all got the same amount of time in each day, because I don't have children. I have more free time than people with children. But what I will say is that we make time for things that are important to us. And if I'm making time to watch 2 hours of Netflix on an evening, then I'm not spending 2 hours writing the thing that I want to write. And that's a choice that's valid. I'm not judging you for that. But if you then come back and say, I don't have time to write a book that I really want to write, I'm going to question how much you want to write that book. And it's like, all I'm doing is trying to get people to be honest with themselves about what they want to do and why they want to do it. And if they don't want to do it, that's cool. But like, if you do really want to do it, then let's find a way to make that happen.
Yeah, no, 100%. This is it's so good. And I think too, like, but that's what, people need you for coaching them, is like that you can give that pep. Some people just need that pep talk, and it's really, if you want to hack, there's your hack. Stop watching, or just watch less TV. You still want to watch an hour of Netflix, use that other hour to to do some writing.
Yeah,
And
I'm not knocking the Netflix watching either, because I get a lot of inspiration from that. Like it's reading. It's basically reading through your eyeballs. Like, well, so is reading through your eyeballs. That was a daft thing to say, but you know what I mean. It's like
yes, no, it's so funny how that works. And even the other one that's really insidious, I think, is the feeling as though you need a mentor. I have a mentor who I will not name, partly because of respect for the relationship, partly because this person is well known enough that it'll sound preposterous if I even name this person. And I say this because he gets emails like constantly from people who are like, will you be my mentor? And here he is mentoring, quote unquote, me. And we just sort of like have friendly conversations, and we talk about, how our families are doing and weird little details, because at the end of the day, like, we're both engaged in that open secret you describe of like show up every day and work in a way that works for you. And it's very funny how that works. But there's people thinking like, oh, I'll get a mentor, or I'll get a degree, or I'll
yeah. And for some people that could be like super helpful. Like I have many mentors for lots of different areas, but ultimately none of them can make me do anything. And it's like, what do I want to elevate? I will go and find someone to help me do that, or I will, go learn something, whatever. But yeah, and I'm not for everybody. Like, you're not for everybody. Any mentor is not everybody needs a mentor right now. It's like sometimes the best thing that you can do is start a writing practice, whatever that looks like. And it's like, even if it's just a doodle a day, or like my journaling, holding my journal in front of me right now. But it's like, that's literally what I do all day. This is terrible radio. But it's like I have like 4 quadrants, and one of them is 7 things I've done today. One of them is 7 things I've seen or heard. One of them is a quote. And one of them is I'm going to draw something. And it's like, for me, that's an amazing writing practice, because I'm never out of ideas. Like I said this morning, I was like, that maybe that's what you want to do. Maybe that's your mentor. Before you ever even think about a writing coach or a writing mentor or something like that, try that first, because it might not be for you. Not everybody wants to be a writer, a professional writer, whatever, and that's fine. It's like there's so many other things that you can do first, and then when you get to the point where you're like, actually, I really do need more help with this, or I want more help with this, not necessarily need. It's like, then go find the person for you.
Yeah, totally. And also if I can like add to that with some highly condescending advice to whoever needs to hear it, but said with love, there are these places called libraries and bookstores, and they're full of, if you want to call it, mentorship from people. I mean, I think about my bookshop, Joan Didion is a mentor I've never met, Sebastian Junger is a mentor I've never met.
David Sedaris.
Totally. Oh, yeah.
Maya Angelou.
And that's what's really cool. These people are always available. You can borrow their brain. You can learn from, you mentioned Elmore Leonard. He has that fun little coffee table book of 10 rules for writing that started as like a column or he was answering a question for a newspaper. And it's like, it took him his whole life to figure out some of these things, and you can just read that and benefit from it.
Yeah.
So none of I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, that should never be an obstacle, not having like a established person who's taken an interest in your work or whatever. You can start without that.
Yeah, 100%. It's like writing is and should be accessible to absolutely everybody, regardless of who you are, where you're from, what your income level is, what your background is. It's like, this is why I'm like super fiercely protective of libraries as well, because we need libraries. Oh my God, we need libraries. That's where you can go and find a quiet space to actually write as well as read. And there's just so much out there if you know where to look for it. And the key is using it. So don't just read it, like, use it. And I will give another top tip for people. This is something that I do all the time. I write out longhand passages from books and articles and things that I really love, and then take them to bits. And I'm like, why? Why did I love this? Why did this strike me? There you go. Yeah, holding the index card. Mine will go into my trusty notebook. But then I'm like, okay, I'm going to read this article. And it's like, why did I love it so much? What was it about this? Like, what hooked me? What made me cry? What made me laugh? What made me angry? What made me feel something? And I will pull those those bits apart. And that's something that everybody can do. It's like you can teach yourself what good writing is by finding out what moves you. And yes, it's hard and it's hard work, but it's also joyful work as well, because it's just like you get to dive into work that just like makes your brain sparkle, and it's so much fun. It's so much fun, and it's like, think of it as being fun instead of work, and everything will get easier.
Yes. Yeah. And that's, I mean, that's a big one for ADHD too, because the minute you turn something, I mean, I've always thought that like writing is like my karma for being an obnoxious student. Now I have homework for the rest of my life, and I never used to do homework. But I want to, before we go, I want to ask about Don't Eat the Frog.
Oh, yeah.
So you have, like, speaking of life hacks and kind of obnoxious, vapid sayings, you sort of took on one of the most, and to me, that's one of the very benign ones where it actually sounds like very good advice. And for those who don't know, tell me if I'm saying this right. Eat the frog means to take on your heaviest, most odious, difficult task first. Kind of that's what eat the frog is. So why are you saying don't eat the frog?
Because it's terrible advice for people like me, and possibly people like you as well. And yeah, I think Mark Twain said it originally: eat the frog first and nothing worse will happen to you for the rest of the day. Which, he's not wrong. But then it's been taken by productivity people to be like, get the biggest thing out of the way first, and then the rest of the day will be easy. The problem with that is it's not universal, and it's put out there as being a universal piece of advice, and that's what I object to. It's like, I'm not saying that eat the frog is bad advice for everybody. It's not. I know people that it's great advice for. But I've been running my business now for 15 years, and I tried for years, probably for the better part of a decade, to eat the frog first, and I could never do it. And I would spend, half a day, whole day, staring at the screen, crying, because I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, I am broken, I am bad. This is the reason that I'm not a millionaire, because I haven't done all of these things that, do you know what I mean? And it was just like, it wasn't until I got my ADHD diagnosis that I realized that actually that's terrible advice for people like me, because if you put a big, awful task in front of me as the first thing to do, and that's what my brain is expected to do, it's going to freeze. And so I've discovered that actually what I need to do is, I talk about tiny beetle steps because sometimes baby steps are too big. So you break it down into tiny, tiny steps. And I know that's not news, but I also think about, what can I do that's fun? So maybe I'll eat a biscuit before I have my lunch, and then I'll eat another biscuit. It's like, I call it a dopamine sandwich. So I'll like do a fun thing first. It's like, maybe I'll put some music on and do a little dance. Maybe I will play Lemmings on my phone for 10 minutes and it'll make me happy. And then I will slide into starting that task that I don't want to do, that's really bothering me. And that's the only way that I'm ever going to get started. I can't sit there, I can't just come in cold and be like, I'm going to do this thing that I don't want to do, that's big and scary and difficult. It's like, how am I going to make it as easy as fun and fun as possible? And that's why I wrote the book, was like, all this advice that we're given as universally good advice for everybody that you should do if you want to be successful, it's not universal. It frustrates me that it's put out there as being like panacea. There's no nuance to anything. We're back to the whole binary thing again. It's like, no. And for different people at different times as well, advice is going to work or it's not going to work. It's not like this advice is going to work for you. It's like, that might work for me on a Tuesday afternoon, but on a Thursday morning, it's terrible. And so it's like, how can we have flexibility of thought and advice, and have things that we can pick and choose from, instead of do this thing this way and you'll be successful?
No, it's such a good point that these things are not. Yeah, it's like you eat the frog sometimes if that's what works, and then maybe don't think that you're a loser because you've got to do email first or whatever. It's really funny too how it seems like a lot of these hacks are very useful for people who are literally minded, but they can be these huge pitfalls if you take them too seriously. And I mean, the classic example was like, there was this phase of people using email autoresponders. And like, the whole idea is like, those are for like the busiest people in the world to manage an unmanageable inbox, not for like, year one freelancers who should be so lucky to be even getting an email. Like,
yeah, it's like and Tim Ferriss's 4 bloody-hour work week as well.
I think that's where it came from. That's where it came from, I think, was
yeah.
the
And
email.
I think, no shade to him, that's fine, but people took it so literally, and it's like, how do you think he got to the point where he could work a 4-hour work week? He did not do it by starting off with a 4-hour work week. I can guarantee you that. And it's like, and even if you read the book, you know that because he talks about all of the stuff that he did and all of the help that he has. And it's like, he's not doing the 40-hour week. Other people are. That's the point.
Yeah, yeah, no, and in fairness, I mean, I think he does a pretty good job of qualifying those things.
He does. That's an interpretation, probably.
But even that, like, I remember I heard an interview where he was saying that there's people who they'll get out their phone if they see him at a cafe 5 hours because it's like, wait a minute, there's your work week done. But yeah, to anyone who hasn't read the book, that's not about.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, that was absolutely no shade to Tim Ferriss because he's got a great podcast as well. But it was like, it's the people who parrot what he says without any nuance that is frustrating. And I think Simon Sinek suffered from the same thing as well. There's like his start with why, and it's like, don't start with why. But like, again, people kind of misunderstand it and they take the bits and it's like, oh, this is like the font of all wisdom. It's like, no, it's not. That's not it. Yeah. Yeah, the wellness space is terrible, that kind of thing. It's just, yeah, the fitness space and wellness space. It's like, everybody should be doing this. Like, really? Really? I don't think so, no.
and at the same time, I mean, I would defend the idea that this is like the best time ever to have ADHD or even to just be kind of different in any way because like there's just so much available and a lot of these tools are sort of built to, I mean, I don't know, I haven't been late ever because I have a really good calendar app and I don't know, did you ever like there's this one trait where I've heard it's an ADHD thing where you're almost like fetishistic about watches, like you have to have a watch. And
oh my gosh, so literally the reason that I'm wearing my Apple Watch or the watches are available is because, and I literally lost a client, like I had to refund them because I missed a coaching call, and it happened for a cluster nonsense. I don't know if I can swear on a podcast.
Go for it, yeah.
A clusterfuck of reasons. And the first reason was I broke my own rules of not doing any client work on a Monday, and I had scheduled their request to a Monday afternoon call, but because I don't do that, it didn't exist in my head. I was out away from my desk, so I didn't have my calendar app on my phone. I didn't have my phone on me either, and I wasn't anywhere near the many paper post-it notes that I use and my journal that I use to kind of do my daybook. And so it just didn't exist. It had ceased to exist. Like, object permanence is a thing for ADHD people. If we can't see it, it doesn't exist. And I came back half an hour later to an email from this person saying, we had a call. And I was like, no, we didn't. Like, even when she jogged my memory, I still had no memory of that happening. And she was rightly really annoyed, and I refunded her. And that was all the rest of it. And again, that was before I realized that I had ADHD. And that's why I have a watch now, because this buzzes to me 10 minutes before every call, because I was like, I literally lost money because so the ADHD tax is real, people. And I literally lost money. But yeah, it's that kind of, I am obsessive about my lists. And, when I was getting my diagnosis, I was a bit like I did the thing that I think a lot of people do. It's like, am I just attention seeking? Have I really got this? My life is more or less together. And Joe was like, the way you organize your life is not normal. Like, look at all of the structures you've put in place over your 40 whatever years on the planet. That's not normal. And so that's the only way that you have coped, and it's very stressful and all the rest of it. And so yeah, it's really interesting to kind of look at the systems that we put in place to cope with the things that we can't cope with.
Yes, yeah. And I want to be respectful of your time, but I have like a couple follow-up questions based on what you just said. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, for me, the pile method, I do that for just about everything. Real quick, for anyone at home who doesn't know what the ADHD tax is, because I'm someone, like, I was diagnosed when I was 6 years old. Probably one of the few benefits of getting an education in America, where when there's a hyper vigilance for anyone not being like sort of cookie cutter. But yeah, I remember when I was recently, I learned what the ADHD tax was, and it was incredible. I felt very much identified with that. What is that?
So it is the phenomenon whereby money just disappears and you don't know how, or stuff costs you money. So, for example, a really good idea, I forget to cancel subscriptions because they don't exist anymore. Like, some people are really organized about that. Even if I put reminders, I do put reminders all over the place now. I had 2 sets of car insurance for an entire year. Like, that's a massive waste of money, I didn't have home insurance for quite a long time. I went without an MOT for 6 months because, which I got away with. I think the law of that is, as soon as you notice, if you carry on not having an MOT, then you will definitely get pulled over.
Okay, so it's like an intention,
It's like the universe is gonna shit on you if you realize it. But yeah, just stuff like that. There's a couple of examples. Like, we went on holiday, and we had a really late flight home. We landed at like midnight or something, and was getting really anxious about Joe driving late at night because previously I've woken up and kind of screamed at regular intervals because I thought I was driving, and he hates that. I don't know why. And so I thought, I'm going to be really organized, and I booked a hotel for us to stay in at the airport as we flew back. And 2 days later, I had an email from that hotel saying, "Hope you enjoyed your stay." And I was like, "What stay?" Totally forgotten. We just drove home. And so again, that was like 200 quid's worth of, yes, it's sunk cost because it's gone, but it's still, I count it as the ADHD tax because I didn't get the benefit of it. So many things that I've got so many double copies of books because I've forgotten that I've bought it, and I've stuck it in a pile somewhere, and then I've bought it again. I think one memorable occasion I found 4 copies of the same book, so that was fun. Just, impulse purchasing as well. Impulse buying is a real thing. Like, I have a cupboard full of shame, which is all of the boxes of stuff that I've bought. And like, my husband now works from home because he's a consultant, and that has tempered it a little bit because I do now think a little bit because I'm like, I can't see him like more parcels arriving. But it's like, it really is. I laugh about it, but it's a source of shame because it's just like, it's such a waste of money. And then there might be people listening who are like, well, just don't buy stuff. It's like, it's not that simple. It's like, I get really excited about something, and it's like, I'm just going to do that. And I might regret it later. I don't return clothes that don't fit because there's so much. It's such a faff. It's like, I've got to package it up. I've got to put it, and I forget, and then I just get distracted. So that's, yeah. Does that explain it?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I feel like the list goes on. I mean, I'm thinking of examples in my own life, and for listeners at home, I mean, there is like empirical evidence to this. This is something that's been peer reviewed and studied. This isn't a case of just like a bunch of people with ADHD having bad Amazon Prime discipline or whatever. And yeah, even I find like booking flights later than I like, if I had just done it on time, it would have cost less. Or if I'd remembered that Christmas happens every year, and stuff like that. And there's, I mean, the thing I've seen like in my family, even just being more accident prone. I mean, there's good evidence that people with ADHD don't live as long because we're much more likely to die by accident.
Yeah, break stuff all the time.
Yeah. So those are things I tend to bring up with people who think that this is just like kids running around disorder or whatever. If I was to like, and kind of last question, then I also want to hear about kind of what's on the horizon for you, but another little bit of follow up there. And I love how we've like really embraced the tangents here. You've described situations where kind of ADHD has gotten in the way of work stuff, and book storytelling professionals, we tend to be creatives, but oftentimes we're working with like very buttoned up businessy types and entrepreneurs and founders and people like that. And did you initially, when you started kind of sharing your story and that this is a part of who you are and a part of the way you work, were you ever concerned that someone would write that off as unprofessional, or maybe a liability, that they don't want to work with someone who's going to like forget an appointment or something? Was that ever a concern? And did that concern ever come true? Was it groundless? What was that like?
1,000%. I still don't talk about it as much as I could because even though I'm a massive oversharer, there are also aspects of my life that I'm actually really private about, and so that's kind of one of them. But yeah, every day I worry. So it's like, I worry that people, because I am scatty, and I know that there's a reason for it, and that's really valuable now that I know that there's a reason for it. But I can be really flaky, and so that's why I've got so many systems in place to, and I am also extremely hard on myself as well. So I'm like, it has to be perfect for myself, for my clients, for everything. And so I really, really do worry about sharing this kind of thing in case people are like, oh, well, she's not going to be any good at this, that, and the other. And, to be fair, for some people, I'm not going to be the right person because of that. And that's fine. And I think that self-qualifies people out as well. Like, if that's going to be a problem for somebody, then that's cool. They're probably not my kind of person. We're not going to get on well. And so that's good. It's like, you go find someone else and I will not have to feel bad. And so, yeah, I do worry about it, but I am getting much better now at being like, well, honestly, I would rather put my whole self out there and have people know the kind of person that they're dealing with. And I found that actually it's brought towards me the kind of people that I love working with. They're a bit more like me. They understand. They understand what it's like. Like 90% of the time, I am on point with my appointments. Like I'm not flaky. It's that other 10% of the time that it can be difficult. And I think I found that as long as I'm upfront about that, and it's like, this is who I am, this is what I struggle with, I'm going to do my absolute best. I've got a VA who is amazing, and she's really, really good at helping me keep on top of things. But if any slip-ups happen, this is going to be why, and I will make sure they're put right. And people I've found have been very, because everybody makes mistakes, whether they've got ADHD or not. And I think as long as you're upfront about it, like I've always been more interested in how can we fix it than who's to blame. And that's the kind of person that I want to work with. It's like, if I screw up, I'm going to like move heaven and earth to put it right. I'm going to try not to screw up in the first place, but if I do, then that's not going to be how we finish. It's going to be put right by the time we're done.
No, that's a great way to put it. And I'll tell a quick story on my end, because I remember doing B2B copywriting for a lot of years, and like, again, no real complaints. I worked with great people, but there was always that element of like, hope this email finds you well. There's a certain, you're supposed to, what is it? People have those like fun facts, and they're totally lame. It's like like the fun fact is like, I have a birthmark, which like even that might be, depending on where it is, like too much sharing, or and I remember I was on a call pitching a ghostwriting project, and talk about noticing, kind of having that nose for where the conversation might go. His hang up was he kind of didn't want to work with like a bookish writerly writer who hadn't really ever gone through anything in their life. And I was super nervous to do this, and I figured I was probably going to cost myself the call, but I figured I'd lost it anyway if I was in any way making this guy think that I was just the bookish guy. And so I shared, a pretty like not work appropriate story about myself. And it just transformed the call. All of a sudden, this guy had all the time in the world, and this book was going to happen, and we were going to be like a writing partnership. And it was something I never would have in a million years revealed about myself in a professional setting. And it saved the day, and I think too, I guess when you look at the world of entrepreneurship, I mean, ADHD and dyslexia, and I forget the correct term, but like autism spectrum disorders, those are like the most overrepresented diagnosis in amongst founders and entrepreneurs. And
yeah, because we don't fit in anywhere else.
yeah, exactly. So anyway,
I love that you shared that story, because I just think it's really important, because it's like it's also a real act of generosity on your part. It's like sharing a piece of yourself with people is really generous, because it encourages them to then share something with you. Like, all we want as humans is to be seen and feel understood. That's all we want. Like food, shelter, sex, blah, whatever. But then we want to just to be seen and understood. And so to share a part of yourself, like that kind of part of yourself, is a real act of love and generosity. And so I'm not surprised that sealed the deal for you. And you can kind of bring it back to writing again for people who are thinking, how can I write better, whatever better means. It's like, share of yourself generously. And that's not the same as emotionally vomiting on your audience. There is a difference, but like sharing of yourself is how you will connect with people, and that's what we're trying to do with our writing. So I love that you said that.
Well, and now we're on another tangent. I guess that brings it back to what you were saying, that I feel like we should almost have a disclaimer. It sounds like what you're describing is like vulnerability plus boundaries, and that's maybe how you avoid, because I'm sure there's someone listening, and again, you're talking about this world of things being binary, where someone might be perfect. Now I'm gonna just word vomit about how I have ADHD, and that'll and I don't think either one of us would suggest that that's a winning strategy.
No, it's like, that's probably like a much longer conversation, but it's like, I think there's a pity saying that could probably do with a bit more nuance, but it's like, share the scar and not the scab. I think.
Ooh,
I don't know who said it. I've totally pinched it. I didn't make it up. But yeah, it's that idea of, if something is still really raw, you probably don't want to share it with the audience, because they're not your therapist. That's not fair. And so it's like, think about what you want to share. Think about why you want to share it. I think that's the key. It's like, why do you want to share it? And if the reason is totally selfish, then it's probably not the right time to do it. And if the reason is a bit wider than that. It's like, what can we understand about the world and the people in it? And maybe it's a good time to share it. But yeah, it's like that for me is a real quick way of distinguishing between emotionally vomiting and generously sharing. So
Oh, that's such a good heuristic for that. What do you have going on now that you're excited about or in the near future?
oh my gosh, I am currently trying to write my next micro book, and trying to is the operative word. I've kind of sketched it out, and it's tentatively called Kickstart Your Book. And so it's the things that you want to do before you start writing. So as we were talking about earlier, doing that. I've also got a piece competition coming up, so I'm putting together choreographing a piece for a competition in November, trying to come up with a theme and stuff like that. So that kind of ties into my work because it's creative and it's making something. And I have as well every Thursday live on the internet, LinkedIn and YouTube and stuff. I do free 15-minute hot seat coaching sessions for people. And because I find that quite a lot of people don't know what a book coach is or a writing coach at all. It's like, well, what is that? And so I do these free sessions. All I ask in return is that you actually show up and give me a testimonial for it afterwards. But yeah, it's like, book it on Calendly, tell me what your question or challenge or whatever talking point is, and we will spend 15 minutes just digging into it and at least get a head start on solving that problem for you, or kind of moving you ahead. So that is, I've did a bunch of them a year or so ago, and then typical ADHD fashion, forgot to carry on. They're really cool. They're very rewarding. A lot of the people who did those with me went on to actually become clients as well. So that was cool. But yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Awesome. I will have follow-up questions about that another time because I'd love to just basically steal that idea, or maybe even
Steal it.
Weave it into this podcast, or even like maybe if you want to come on here, do want like walk us through that. And we're constantly trying to put together bonus episodes. Jordan Ring and I did one. There's one about red flags that I keep mentioning that's in the works. It may be up before your episode goes live. And so where can listeners find you?
They can find me on my email list, and that's where I want everybody to come. And if you go to moxiebooks.co.uk/freebies, you get a choice of 3 free cool things that will put you on my email list. The first one is 12. It's like a short masterclass series, 12 emails, my best advice about writing your book. One of them is the 13-day writing challenge to get people just started off with a writing practice of their own. And the final one is people often ask me, but they really do. How do I write so much and so consistently when my brain does the things it does? And so I made a little video just with like my top 5 tips as to how I I'm so prolific about the stuff that I create. So those are the 3 things. You can also find me on LinkedIn. If you search for Vicky Quinn Fraser, I'm lurking around there. And I'm on Instagram as Tiny Beetle Steps, where you can find me on trapeze and pole, as well as doing writing things.
Awesome. Well, Vicky, thank you so much. Thanks for all the tangents. That was
yeah, this has been one of the funnest podcasts I've done in ages. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. And like I said, and even if you have an idea for a bonus episode, I'm trying to do more of those. And basically it's just one topic deep dive. So I'd love to have you back soon.
I would love that. Let's do it.
If you have an epic story, I'd love to hear it. You can find me at dailyprose.com or on LinkedIn. My links and Vicky's are in the show notes. Thanks for